What is up, my bubble noobs? In this video, I'm going to go over an example on how to use the Google Calendar API. I've heard feedback loud and clear. I need better examples, more detailed examples. And so in this video, I'm going to go from zero to complete Google Calendar API integration. I'm going to start with literally no workflow. So I just built some dummy design. These buttons don't work. And we are going to go from zero to create functionality where you can add events to the repeating group, and then users can add them to their calendars. As usual, if you want access to this bubble editor, there's a link in the description where you can get access to that. And lastly, before I get started, if you haven't seen my YouTube video where I go over accessing Google APIs within your bubble app, also will be in the link in the description. Check that out before watching this video. This is just an example of using that auth2 workflow with Google. So if you haven't seen that, it's going to be harder to understand what I'm doing here. And lastly, if you don't want to suck at Bubble, subscribe to my channel. So yeah. All right, let's jump in. Okay, so we have two pages here. We have the index and we have the events. Let's ignore all the other pages. Actually, just delete and events. All right, so on the index is where we're doing the auth2 flow. I just created a dummy sign up group and a group code. So the user is going to sign up and then access Google Calendar and then give permission to the app to use Google Calendar. And then I have a stupid button here that will simply log the user out if needed. So over here, when the user is logged out, this group will be visible. When the user is logged in, this button will be visible. And then when current user is logged in and current user's access token is empty, this will be visible. So if they have an access token, that means that they've connected to Google Calendar. All right, let's look at the database setup here. Very simple. I just have a user. On the user, I have an access token, expiry token date, and a refresh token. Again, watch my previous video if you don't know what these mean. All right, so let's look at an event. An event, I just have a name, a description, a start date, and end date. You can see these are date fields in Bubble. Extremely simple, nothing complicated here. Let's dive in and actually build out this functionality. All right, so if you watch my previous video, make sure you have your Google Cloud Console set up and everything you need there. So you should have a client ID and a client secret from Google Cloud. So if you have a client ID and client secret, should look like this. Please don't steal this. Actually, I'll probably delete this after this video. Cool. All right, let's go back here. So in the sign up, so I kept the sign up here. I'm just signing up, input, enter emails value, and I'm calculating a random string, just a random password. It doesn't really matter. You can use any login flow you want. And then log out, it's just logging the user out. All right, once the user is logged in, this is where the auth2 comes into play. All right, access Google Calendar. So when the user logs in, we didn't make any changes to the access token on the user table, right? So that means that because the current user is logged in and current user's access token is empty, this group will become visible. So this is where they connect to the Google Calendar. Now, to connect to the Google Calendar, you actually need to open an external website, which is going to be the auth2 URL. Again, in the previous video, I go over this. I kept it, and it looks something like this. So over here, we have the client ID, the redirect URL, and the response type. We want a code, and then the scope we're accessing. So let's Control C here. Oh, wrong editor. And paste it in here. Later in the video, I'm going to go over how to separate this in the test version and the live version, because I know that's also been a point of feedback I've gotten. Okay, so we're opening an external website. Awesome. That sounds good. The next thing we want to do is we want to, essentially what's going to happen is going to take us to this website where you're going to click, all right, give Google permissions to access my Google Calendar. And the user is going to go through continue and log into their Google account. And then it's going to take them back to the page. And there's going to be a code in the URL when they get back to the page. So we want to create a workflow that when condition is true, essentially when group code text is not empty, and we're going to run a workflow. So that way we know when the page is loaded and there's a code in the URL, we want to run a workflow. Now, when I say group codes text, essentially what I did was, if I go back to group code, this is group code. And what I'm doing here is I made the type text, and I'm getting a parameter from the URL, and the parameter name is code. So if you don't, essentially there's going to be a code in the URL, and I'm getting it and saving it to this group. And then I'm referencing it in this workflow where I'm saying group code's text is not empty. So it'll be empty until there's a code in the URL. Once there's a code in the URL, what I need to do is I need to run an API call that's essentially going to take that code from the URL and swap it out for an access token and a refresh token. So how do I do that? I go to the API connector, and I'm really starting from scratch here. I'm going to add another API, and I'm going to call it Google Auth 2. Now, I'm going to create an API call that's going to be a get call. Now, I'm going back to, this is the editor from the accessing Google APIs within your Bubble app. This is the Bubble editor I shared. If not, you can copy directly from wherever, doesn't matter, wherever. You can copy directly from this video. Essentially, you just need to hit this endpoint. So I'm just going to copy. Oh, it's a post request. Okay, so let's go back here. Post. This is what I would use. So if you bought access to my editor and you have this API call, or you just want to copy it directly from here, for me, it's just easy to copy from my old editor. All right, what do we have here? We have the client ID. So it's a post request, client ID. What else do we have? Client secret. Cool. Code. Grant type. And redirect URL. Awesome. Okay, where do we get the client ID? Let's just populate this together. So if I go back here and I take the client ID, I can copy it and paste it in here. This is going to be private. We never want to change this unless we're changing our API key, or this gets compromised, which is what I'm doing right now. And then the client secret, again, I just got it from here, client secret. Cool. Very straightforward. Code. Okay, the code is not going to be private. This is going to be the only value that actually changes. Well, not the only value. If you're using a live version, you're probably going to want to change the redirect URL, right? You don't want to, when you get the code and you redirect the user and they log in, on the live version, you want to redirect them to the live version. On the test version, you want to redirect them to the test version page. And I'll go over that a little later on how we can do that. For now, we're just going to use the test version. So the page I want to redirect them to is going to be one of the pages I have set up here. Okay, authorize redirect URLs within here. So the one I want to redirect them to is actually just the basic Google manual auth bubbleapps.io. It's literally just the URL of the index page. Very simple. Pasted it in there. It has to be the exact URL. So if it's a page, it should have the exact URL of the page. And to get that URL, you literally just have to click preview and you'll get the URL you need. Just make sure it matches one of these authorized redirect URLs. Cool. Grant type is code, authorization code. Let's copy that. So this is also going to be private. Yeah, that's pretty much it. All right. Soon we're going to initialize the call. Let's just call this get access token. Cool. Get access token. Awesome. All right. The next call we want to do is, well, actually what we can do, well, let's just separate them. All right. So now let's do get access token via refresh token. So this is to get an access token every time, and this is how we get it via a refresh token. So we're only going to use this API call when they first sign up, because in that first API call, we get a refresh token. So the authorization code gives us, this grant type gives us a refresh token and a code that we can put in here. But afterwards, we're just going to use a refresh token to get that access token. I don't know if that made sense. Essentially, over here, this code is from the URL, and we're using that to get a refresh token and an access token. Afterwards, we can just use the refresh token to get the access token. In my previous video, I go in that in depth. If you didn't understand it, watch that video. All right, so over here, what we want to do is add in some separate parameters, and I'm just going to go back to here, new access token. I guess that's what I called it, new access token. All right. I don't know, my naming is so good. Whatever. No, this is get token via authorization code. And this is get token via refresh token, I guess, or token code, whatever. Doesn't matter. It's the same URL. So we're just going to copy this URL into here, post request, and then we're going to add some parameters. Let's add these parameters, client ID, client secret, and then refresh token, and grant type is going to be refresh token. Technically, you can have these in the same, I don't know if you can have them in the same API call. If you have dynamic JSON or something, you can do it that way. But for now, we'll just have them in separate API calls. Refresh token, and then the last thing is grant type. And the grant type is going to be refresh token. So grant type and refresh token. All right. Okay, cool. So the only thing we're changing here and making dynamic and not private, if you uncheck private, it means you can dynamically add a value when you do the API call. So now we're copying the client ID, client secret. Awesome. Same thing. Client ID, client secret. We got it from our console. All right, awesome. Now, none of these are initialized, right? This was a big problem people have. I'm going to go over how to initialize them in a second. Okay, cool. So now we have these API calls, and we want them both to be actions, okay? We don't want them to be data. Actions you can use in the workflow tab. So we can call these dynamically as a workflow. All right, let's go back to our page and look at the API call we want to do. So right now we want to call this API, but because it's not initialized, it's not appearing here. So let's initialize it manually, and I'll show you how to do that. It's really simple. We just go here to the preview. Let's log out because I'm already logged in as a user, and let's add in an email. Now, if you have one email that's verified on this, right, Google console or whatever, in the previous video I went over, you have to add in specific emails that are authorized for testing until your app is approved by Google. So if you have one email, the way you can do it is if it's a Gmail, you just add plus to that email, and then you can add in whatever you want. It doesn't matter. Gmail.com, and it'll create a new user. So I'm signing up here. So let's sign up. And then voila, we get this button. Now, once we click that button, see it's taking us to that URL, and we're going to sign in using the email, and this app isn't verified. Yes, we know that. And then it's going to accessing one service, right? It's accessing Google Calendar. Continue. And it's redirecting us to this page, but aha, it's appending this code to the URL. So right now we need the code. So let's go ahead and copy the code from the URL to initialize the API call. Once it's initialized, we can dynamically set the code, but for now, we literally have to do it manually. So let's copy this code again. Whoa, code. See, code equals, very simple in the URL. Now, if we go back to here, get token via authorization code, voila, we can paste it in, click initialize. Unauthorized client. Okay. All right, I believe I resolved the issue. Yes, okay. So the issue I had was that in my API call, I'll go back to that in a second. But before I do that, what I'm going to do now to initialize the other API call is if I go hide or show raw data, I can see I have a refresh token here. So I'm just going to copy this refresh token and do Control C. Then I'm going to click Save. And if I go down to my next API call and I go to the refresh token, I can paste it in and initialize this call too. And boom, I get an access token, expires in, scope, etc. So my issue with my API call, and this is where you have to be like very careful with Google. They're unforgiving and very secure, which is good. But in my URL call, in my open external website, the client ID was wrong. So it was giving me an authorization code, a code in the URL that was for this client ID, but it was the wrong client ID. So I had to go back and I just double checked everything and I found the issue. So yeah. Okay, cool. So I initialized the call. Now I can actually use them in workflows. Pretty simple. Again, just paste it in. This is not the code you'll have to use every time. And it's not the refresh token you have to use every time. Because it's not private, you can make this dynamic. All right, so let's go back to our API calls, to our workflows where we were. Okay, so when group code text is not empty. All right, what are we going to do? So the first thing we're going to do is call that first API call. So we're going to get token via authorization code. And the code is going to be group code. So that's going to be the group code text. So that's going to be the code from the URL that we're inserting here. So we like manually did it a second ago, but basically I'm doing it now via a workflow where I'm just entering this code manually into this API call. Cool, awesome. And then the next thing we're going to do is going to make changes to current user. And what we're going to change is the access token, which is going to be result of step one's access token. The expired token date, which is going to be current date and time plus seconds, result of step one's expired in. I don't know if you can hear the music in the background. If so, I apologize. And then the refresh token is going to be result of step one's refresh token. Cool. All right, now we have all that saved in the user. Now we can take them to the actual events page that I have set up where the events are saved. So let's go to page. Let's go to events. Awesome. Okay, so now they've hooked up their Google Calendar. Now I can go to the events page and actually start adding events and adding things to our calendar. Okay, cool. So let's test this out and see how it looks in actual final format. So let's log out and create a new user and see how it works. So again, I'm creating a lot of test users with the same email because I'm using that plus and then at gmail.com. Anything you add after plus will be a new user in Bubble, but for you, it's the same email. And so they'll receive emails to the same address, which is cool. So we can click sign up and then access Google Calendar. And it's taking me to that URL that we created. I'm going to access it via this same Google account because that's the one I have configured. And then boom, takes me to the event page. How awesome is that? All right, now we're on the events page. Now let's configure exactly how we add events and then add to calendar from those events. When I say add to calendar, I mean add to Google Calendar, obviously. All right, let's do it. So let's go to the events page now that we have the auth2 set up. Over here, let's start with this. So add event, we're going to go to, so I created this pop-up where you can add an event from, just has the name, start date, end date, and description, and then an add event button. So let's work here. So let's add event. So we're going to reset pop-up, add event, and then we're going to show this pop-up add event. Awesome. Cool, that's all we need there. And then once the user sees that pop-up, they're going to save the event. Very simple. This is like basic Bubble stuff. We are going to hide the pop-up first. Pop-up, add event, and then we're going to create a new event. Create a new thing, event. Let's just add all fields. So description is going to be multi-input description value. End date is going to be date and time picker end dates value. Name is going to be, and the date and time picker are just the native Bubble date and time picker that you can find in the designer. So start date and time value, awesome. And then let's create an error alert. Error alert is like a plugin I use, not so important, but I give the user like a little notification like on the side for a second when something happens. Event created successfully. Okay, cool. So now users can add events. That's awesome. All right, awesome. Let's test this out to start. So let's refresh and let's add an event. So let's call this test event 2 and let's add a start date and start time is going to be 1 p.m. End date is going to be 1:30. And this is an awesome event. Awesome. Now let's add that event and we can see that it appears here in the repeating group. I just am searching for events where the start date is greater than current date. So it's all the new events, very, very high end, complex bubble app here, as you can see. Awesome. So we can add events. Now let's make sure that users can add things to the calendar. So add to calendar, when they click add to calendar, it should add the event to their Google Calendar. So going back to my this is on any of my Google Calendar videos. I have a link in the description where you can buy access to all the API calls for Google Calendar. And over here we have Google Calendar lists, Google Calendar colors for calendar, Google Calendar events. So in this case, we're adding an event. We're not messing with the actual calendars. We're literally just adding an event the most basic way. Actually, we can just go to the Google documentation. Here we're going to events and we're inserting an event. We can just copy from here. So let's just copy this to post request. Okay, so sorry, I'm digressing a bit, but when we add to calendar, we need to call an API to add that event to the Google Calendar. So let's go back to plugins. Let's add a new API group and let's call this Google Calendar. All right, and over here, we are going to add event and let's just post, paste here. And I'm going to go back to the documentation, not that documentation, this documentation. And the calendar ID, if we're not adding to a specific different calendar, we're just adding to our main Google Calendar, which is most people. You're not adding to. You can have multiple calendars in Google Calendar. As you can see, like you have reminders, I have a test insert calendar, but mainly I'm just putting events on the Wise Wobbler calendar. And so to make it simpler, you can just, instead of calendar ID, you could just make it primary. And that will insert into your main calendar. And then over here, we need a header. And over here, we're going to put authorization. This is where we're going to get that access token that we saved on the user. This is where it comes into play. We're going to add bearer and then just make this unprivate. And over here, we're going to enter the access token, the user's access token. And this will actually give us access to this user's Google Calendar. All right, so to make things simpler over here, not here, here, there's like all the parameters you can add to adding an event. They're listed here. There's like a lot of them. For simplicity, I'm going to go back to the editor I already have. If you want, you can buy access to this. And over here, add new event, single. So I just went to Google Calendar events and then scroll down to add new event, single. And over here, I have a complete JSON that I can just copy here. Awesome. So let's just copy that. In previous videos on Google Calendar, I have a 6-part series where I go over all these in detail, but I'm just going to skip that for now. So the only thing we want here is the start date, the end date, the summary, and description. So we can honestly, I think we can just delete everything else. Like we don't really need any of this stuff. So let's just delete that and then put a closing brackets and then remove this. And then we want to check that this is valid JSON, because if it's not valid JSON, it's just not going to work. So let's go to JSON lint and paste this in. And let's see. Awesome. It's valid JSON. So this should work. So let's go back here and start with the date time. So first thing, I don't think we need the time zone. So let's get rid of that. Boom. All right. I think that's optional, hopefully. If not, we'll add it back. Awesome. Okay, so now let's add a dynamic date and time for the start and end time. So for the start time, let's put these, I don't know what these are called, but whatever they are, you see this opened up a key value on the bottom, and that's how we can dynamically add in the value from Bubble. So let's call this start time. Start time. And let's call this end time. Make sure they're in brackets. That's really important. So end time. All right, awesome. And then let's uncheck these as private so that we can actually enter data into these values. Now we can dynamically enter the authorization code and the start and end time, but we also want to enter in the summary and description. So let's call this summary. Otherwise, it would just like for the description, every time add in this is a test description, but we want the description to come from the bubble event. So let's make this dynamic also. Description. Awesome. Okay, and again, we want to uncheck private. The only thing that we keep private are things that we don't want to change. And usually if it's a JSON, we want to change them. If it's in a header, we want to change. If we have a single API key, then we probably want to keep it private. But because this is dynamic, it's an auth2 flow, the access token is always changing. We need to make it dynamic. Okay, cool. Now we have everything set up to add an event, but we don't have it initialized yet. So we need to initialize it. Now, how are we going to initialize it? Big question here. It's honestly pretty simple. So let's we need to add in test data to initialize the API call once. And the way we're going to do that is we're just going to enter in a start time, an end time, a summary, and description. So summary and description are easy. Whatever we want for the summary, let's call this test event wise bubbler. Or let's call it initialization wise bubbler. Initialization description. Okay, awesome. Easy peasy. All right. Next thing we need to do is we need to get this access token. We need to initialize that. Now, how do we do that? Well, we know that when we logged in, we generated an access token. When I used those test account, like 5 minutes ago, I created a test account. And remember, I copied into here. First, I copied into here the code and I initialized it. And then I copied the refresh token into here and I initialized it. But then I did an example where I used a real user, right? We tested it out and I created a real user and we saved the token, the access token in the database for that user. So we can just go to our app data and see that user that we just created. The latest user was 1150, not 1146, obviously. And we can just grab that access token. So we can just do Command C and copy that access token. They expire usually after an hour, and it hasn't been an hour. It's only been 10 minutes. So this is still valid. So we can copy that access token and we can paste it in here. So in the bear, after the bear, there's a space, and then I just pasted that access token. Awesome. Now we need a start time and an end time. Okay, so these follow like a specific format. And the best way to do this, also very simple. Let's just go to a test page, create a test page or whatever. And over here, what you can do, what's going on here? Okay, just add a text field in here and then put in here current date and time. And the key thing here is you want to format it. Don't freeze on me. Come on. Simplified extended ISO. Awesome. This is the format that Google accepts as a start time and end time. This is the time format Google accepts. And then if we preview this, why is my computer freezing? We can just copy this time and then go back to our API call. So it's just taking the current time. Again, we're just initializing the call. And in the start time, we just paste in that time. And you don't even need to understand this too much. It's like pretty simple. 2023, the 8th of January, and it's giving me 5:02, and that's Z, which is, I think it's like the plus time zone, so it's just 0. So it's not actually 5:02 for me. But then I can just copy this, and the end time needs to be after the start time. And so I could just make this, instead of 15, instead of 17, I can make it 19. So that would be 7 standard time or whatever the time is, the Z. And therefore the end time is after the start time. And now we have a dummy API call to initialize this add event. Then we can initialize it and boom, it created an event. Awesome. Now let's go to our calendar and actually see if that was created. Boom, initialization, wise bubbler, initialization description. This was added 12:02 to 2:02, right? 2-hour event. Awesome. Added. Cool. Okay, now we have it initialized. Now we can actually build the workflows to the add to calendar. Okay, let's do this. So let's collapse this workflow, make sure this is an action. And let's go back to our workflow. Let's go back to events and let's configure the button to actually add the event. Why is this freezing on me? All right, this sucks. Maybe if I close some tabs. Don't crash on me, please. Okay, maybe that'll be quicker. Okay. Oh yeah, that's a little faster. Good. Okay, so now what we want to do is what we're going to do is basically check. Essentially, every user gets an access token that expires an hour later. So using the auth2 flow, we get an access token. The refresh token doesn't matter. It just helps us get the access token. The access token is what we actually use to access the Google API that we want to access. The refresh token just helps us get it. And every time we get the access token, it expires an hour later. Okay, so what can we do? Well, we have the expired expiration date in bubble date format, and we have the access token. So what we can do is basically just check if their access token is still valid. If so, we can use it to add the event to their calendar. And if not, we can just, using the refresh token, get a new access token. So again, we would be using this second API call to get the access token using the refresh token. So basically what we're doing is we're checking if their access token is valid. If not, we're getting a new one. Okay, so let's create the workflow. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to create a custom event that's basically going to get us the refresh token. So get access token, get new access token. So if the access token is expired, we're just going to get a new access token. All right, so what we're going to do here is we are just going to get access token via refresh token. So all we need to do is plug in current users refresh token, and then we're going to get an access token. And what we're going to do is make changes to current user and make changes to the access token, which is going to be a result of step one's access token, and makes changes to expiry date. And that's going to be current user's date, current date and time. And we're going to add seconds. I don't know why it just returns it in seconds. Result of step one expires in. And so that way it'll add an hour to current date and time and update the current user's access token. All right, let's go back to the add to calendar. All right, so we're back to this button, right? This is like everything we did so far was just so we can add in this add to calendar event. So let's add this to calendar. So now what we're going to do is we're going to go to plugins and we're going to get the Google Calendar add event. That's the API workflow we did to actually add the event to my calendar, right? Pretty complicated. We can see the initial data that I put in there. Now we can actually populate it. But before we do, we need to check. So before we actually do this is we're going to trigger the custom event that's going to get us a new access token if only when current users access token date, so expires token date. So if it's expired, meaning the expiry token date is less than current date and time. So if it's expired, we're going to get a new access token for this user. If it's not expired, we just skip this, meaning the access, well, yes, I don't know why I confused myself. The access expiry date is less than current date of time, meaning it's already expired. We need to generate a new one and get a new access token. And once we do, we can just populate this. So over here, we need bearer and we need the current user's access token. So the best way to do this is we're going to add arbitrary text. I'll show you why. This just makes it easier to write bearer here. And then we can add in the current user's access token. And then over here, the start time is going to be parent groups events. So we're getting the event from here. Over here is a list of events, and we have current cells events. And so therefore we can get parent groups event, and that has all the event information, then event, and the start time is going to be the start date. And we're going to format it in the format that Google wants, which is simplify extended ISO. Perfect. Awesome. Same thing we're going to do with the end date. Parent groups event, end date, formatted in simplified extended ISO. And the summary is going to be parent groups events name, and the description is going to be parent groups events description. And then we can simply add in an error alert too. That kind of gives us notice event added. And the B here just makes it the title bold. That doesn't matter. This isn't even necessary. I just do it out of habit. All right, awesome. Okay, we're done. That's it. We did it. Congratulations to us. All right, so let's go to events and let's click preview. Because I'm already logged in, this should be pretty easy. Test event 2, and if I click add to calendar, boom, event added. All right, let's look at this. There you go. Test event 2 was added to calendar successfully. Now this will work even if a different user logs in with a different calendar. They should be able to still add events to the calendar. Hopefully this was helpful. Let me know in the comments if you want any more examples or if you're interested in anything. And last but not least, forgot to add this in my original recording, but how to get the difference between the live version and the test version. I didn't pay for this bubble app, so I won't be able to actually show you the live version, but I'll show you how I would do it in a real app that I would use and how you can separate. The main thing is the redirect URL, right? When the user goes to that URL in the original access here, after they click access Google Calendar, they're going to a URL, a website, and they have a redirect URL, which is the URL they go to after they get that access code, and that code is only valid for that URL. So what we need to do in the live version is we need a separate redirect URL. In this case, what I would do is actually make the over here, not here, here. The redirect URI, make it unprivate, so then you can essentially differentiate between the live version and the test version, because you're going to need a different redirect URL. So, okay, over here, what you need to do is add in another redirect URI, and that's going to be one without the version test. So if you have whatever your URL is without the version test, that's what you need. Okay, and then you click save. Awesome. So let's grab this. And then what you can do is essentially when you go to open external website, first let's copy this and let's add arbitrary text. That just makes it easier to edit things. And then let's paste it here. And over here, the redirect URI is not going to be the same for the live and test version. And I'm going to show you how to differentiate it when you get the code. So what you do is actually go back here and make this dynamic, insert dynamic value. And then you're going to do isn't live version. I don't know why Bubble does this, but isn't live version. And then we're going to do formatted as text. So if it isn't live, that means it's a test version, which means we're using the regular redirect URL, right? So which is this one. If is no, meaning it is the live version, let's just copy this without the version test, right? And that's the redirect URL. That way you always get the right code no matter what. And then the last thing I would do here is when you're actually calling this API call, which is over here, the redirect URI is going to be the same. You're going to copy, you can copy this expression and just paste it in here. And that'll give you always the correct redirect URL over here, right? So if it isn't live, it's going to give you the test version redirect URL. If it is live, which meaning it's no, then it's going to give you the live version redirect URL. That way you always get the correct code and you can easily deploy to live. Again, I didn't pay for live version, so I'm going to actually remove this from the editor I just used. I guess I'll keep it because everyone's going to deploy to live. So this is how you can separate between the test users and the test version. We'll get all the test codes and the test refresh tokens. and all the live users will get the correct codes and refresh tokens. So yeah. I've actually stopped taking on new client projects, new freelance client projects so I can focus on YouTube together with my full-time bubble job. As usual, there I'm going to drop a bunch of links in the description, but the main one is all my other Google Calendar API videos have a link where you can get all the APIs we reference, which is like the entire set of Google Calendar APIs. If you want access to this specific editor, I will also leave that link in the description. So make sure you're buying the correct one if you do want access to the editors. If not, and you just were able to do this from the video, all the power to you. And yeah, I really appreciate everyone watching this. And let me know if you have any more suggestions, or follow me on Twitter. Hit me up at WiseBubbler. I'm going to end the video now. Thanks for watching.